Today is February 3, 2018, and we are going to continue our discussion of a testimony written by Ellen White called Experience Not Reliable, published in Testimonies for the Church, Volume 3, pages 67 to 79. But as always, let us ask our Heavenly Family to guide us before we start. Heavenly Family, thank you once again for these testimonies and for the opportunity to study them. Thank you for opening our minds to the principles that we've been learning in this message. Help us not only to understand them, but to apply them. Help us to be able to recognize when we are being tempted to discard the message or to interpret it wrongly or brush it aside in favor of our own biases. Help us to identify with the truth and only the truth, and to live and love and work for the upbuilding of your kingdom. Thank you so much. We ask this in the name of Branch. Amen.
Amen.
All right, so I'll kind of recap what we're doing here. We've been looking at this testimony, as I've already mentioned, called Experience Not Reliable. The basic point of this testimony that Ellen White wrote is to convey the idea that what people generally term experience, that being just circumstances through which we go and our perception of those circumstances, is not actually reliable. Instead, the only genuine experience is knowledge derived from a variety of careful experiments. So that's a very basic foundational point to make. But that's the basic idea which Ellen White conveys through this testimony. Now, she does go into more specifics than that, and it is written in a particular context. First, I'll mention that the context is that she is writing to a woman who has health issues and is depending upon her own experience in order to determine what is best for her to do with her health. Ellen White was counseling this woman to not depend on her own experience, but to yield her experience in favor of the judgment of professional doctors who had an altogether different kind of experience, which Ellen White clearly considered to be genuine. They had an experimental knowledge of the workings of the human body, the nature of disease, and how to effectively treat it. And that was considered by Ellen White to be superior to the personal experience of this woman. That's the context in which Ellen White brought out these principles. To explain the principles a little more fully, Ellen White characterized false experience as being habit or indulgence, thoughtlessly and frequently ignorantly followed, biases being allowed to come in and influence one's interpretation of their circumstances, superstition arising from a diseased imagination which arrays itself against science. These are the sorts of things which Ellen White describes as being characteristics of false experience, and something important to not miss is the fact that this is what she says is generally termed experience. So it's not the case that Ellen White is referring to experiences which everyone would easily recognize as being superstitious or arising from a diseased imagination, or being against science, or being biased, or mere habit. No, Ellen White isn't saying that, oh, well, there are things that we all recognize to be all of those things, and that's false experience. No, Ellen White is saying that what people generally term experience, what people usually think of as genuine experience, is not genuine experience. And she's saying that what people usually think of when they use the term experience, even though they do not realize it, it is superstitious, it is the result of mere habit, it is arising from a diseased imagination, it is arrayed against science, etc., etc. What she describes as genuine experience is a far higher standard of knowledge than most people have. As I've already mentioned, she describes genuine experience as being knowledge derived from a variety of careful experiments. She says that these experiments are actual experiments, made with the mind freed from prejudice and uncontrolled by previously established opinions and habits. These experiments must be conducted with a knowledge of the principle involved in the action. These experiments must be in harmony with natural law. They must be in accordance with science. This is how Ellen White describes genuine experience. And it is particularly telling that the circumstance in which Ellen White made these comments was one in which you have an average individual, on the one hand, with the false experience, and people who were educated and had gained expertise in a particular field as being the ones with the genuine experience. So it is important to realize that what Ellen White is talking about here is two very different methodologies. One being science, the other being ultimately presumption. There are several reasons why we are going through this testimony and several advantages which we intend to gain by means of going through it. One thing we wish to learn is how to obtain a genuine experience and how to tell the difference between true and false experience, thus enabling us to recognize our own false experiences and to no longer depend on them, and to know how to create for ourselves genuine experiences. Another aspect to all this, and another advantage we wish to gain, is to obtain a better view of science in general. Many branches, Davidians, Adventists, Christians, and religious folk in general have a certain degree of negativity toward science as a method, as a body of knowledge, and as a profession or field or community of specialists. And what we are saying here is that that negativity, that anti-science perspective, is ill-founded and should be no longer, especially for those who profess present truth. Because an anti-science perspective is, in fact, contrary to all the principles of the present message. And science as a method and the scientific community as a whole is, in fact, far more in harmony with the principles of the present message and even the messages prior to it, going back to Ellen White's own message, than the vast majority of religious people, even those who have high professions of present truth, have been. So we need to learn to appreciate that which we have formerly neglected and trampled upon, namely science. And going through this testimony is a very good way for us to hopefully gain that appreciation. So, with all that said, our past couple meetings have been predominantly taken up with questions and comments and discussion related to these principles. Currently in our reading of the testimony, we are on page 72, and we can get back into that. But as I mentioned at the beginning of last night's call, it is not our purpose to simply get through the testimony. It's our purpose to understand the principles, and the discussion that we've had has been just awesome. So I want to start out with asking if anyone else has further comments or questions on any of what we have been discussing relative to this topic. So if you do, feel free to speak up.
I do.
Great.
I really like this topic, and I learned about the scientific-based medicine, and just wondering, and something like small, like what if I had a stomach ache, and something small, I don't need to go to the doctor, and I want to try, I've been told that ginger is really good for a stomach ache, and I used that before. So, am I supposed to look it up and type, research about ginger and stomach ache, and look for some good research paper, but not review articles, to talk about the ginger and how it relates to a stomach ache? Then go for it, because it was just an example. You know what I mean? You have any comment on that?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. Very practical. I think that a lot of people can probably relate to your question. So, again, what do we do with the small things? How about if we have a stomach ache or something else, and there's just some simple remedy that we are used to taking? Should we look that up and see if it has real scientific backing to it, or what? And the answer is yes. We should not just take for granted as being valid things that we have used, even if they're simple things for simple problems, because, again, our own experience is really not reliable. And the fact is, we should really want to know if something really works, rather than just, is it just making me feel like it works? Because just feeling like something works isn't the same as something actually working or actually helping. And so we should really want to know the truth of it. So we should be happy to look up any research that may have been conducted and what science has to say on the question. Because, again, if whatever we're using actually works, then science will demonstrate that it works. And looking it up will only give us validation and good reasons for doing it. And if it doesn't actually work, then looking it up is actually going to help us, because then we can stop doing something that wasn't helping us in the first place. So there should be no fear in investigating it, just like with any topic that we investigate, asking if a certain writing is truly a product of divine inspiration, or asking whether a certain event is really historical. It's the same principle, that we shouldn't fear investigation, and that a close investigation will only manifest the truth, whatever it may be. And since we should only really care about the truth, not about our own ideas and preferences and habits, then we should be very happy to do the research and to look it up and to find out what science has to say on the issue. So, yeah, hopefully that answers your question.
Oh, thanks. I have another question. And lots of time when we are doing research, and I mean, just, looking at stuff on the internet, and we usually find articles, it's more like from review articles, based on the author who have a claim and based on many research paper. But the research papers, they got an idea about is the review, is the summary of other articles, so they make a claim for that. And so we are supposed to read the original article so we can see the sample size and how they conduct the research. So can you give us some tips how to be a critical thinker, how to read these original articles or original research paper?
Yeah, sure. That's another excellent and very practical question. So I'll repeat it again. We know that we are supposed to do the research, and if we see an article and it is citing different studies or papers that have been published reporting research, that we should go and check out the original research to see if the methods were right and so on. So in terms of helpful tips in doing that, first I just want to mention to make use of the best available resources. And what I would say as the best available resources that I know of right now is basically any website that has been put together and established by people who are overtly promoting science-based medicine. So the number one website that comes to mind is sciencebasedmedicine.org. They have a lot of other websites that they link to from their website. So that's a really good resource, and there's lots of different articles on lots of different subjects, and they have a search feature in their website. So if you have a question about a certain particular thing, you can always just type it in the search of their website and see what you come up with. Or you could do the same thing on other websites that are linked to from that website. So that's the first thing, using good resources, and the best resources are those which are at the forefront of promoting science-based medicine. Now, of course, you may not find anything on those websites for what you're really looking into, whatever it may be for different individuals. So then you might go to other websites which are databases of information. So you might look things up on PubMed or in the Cochrane Library. The Cochrane Library is a broader database. It's not just reviews. It just has the individual studies. And so you might have to look it up and do your own review sometimes.
Is Google Scholar another one?
Yes, Google Scholar is another resource that is a great database. So if you just go on Google and type in Google Scholar, it'll take you to a link. And what Google Scholar is essentially a search engine that only pulls up finds in scholarly literature. So medical journals, journals on, from anything, like any type of field, biology, chemistry, astronomy, physics, whatever, any type of scholarly field, Google Scholar will pull up results from those journals. And some of them are not free open access journals, so you can't actually read it. You have to pay for the preview or whatever. But there is free stuff on there too, so it's definitely a valuable resource. So what do you do when you look at a study? Well, depending on what you're looking at, different specifics will apply. So I can't get into like the nitty-gritty of what you'll have to look out for in each circumstance, because depending on what the issue is, different principles will apply and different methods have to be used to study different issues. Just like, when we've studied the community rule before, we looked at lots of different issues. We talked about textual criticism, how to find the original reading of a particular passage where there are textual variants. And there are certain methods that you have to use when addressing a question like that. But we also discussed historical questions. Well, how can we know whether this took place or not, or when this happened? And in order to answer those questions, you have to use different methods. So depending on what the health issue is, different methods have to be used, and so I can't comment on specific methods right now because that's just too detailed and there would be too much to get into. But I will mention the basic principles that are involved, and I know, like you said, Rachel, it comes to critical thinking. So the recommendations that I have for how to go about assessing whether the research that you're looking at is valid or not is, first, understand materialism. Study materialism and really get grounded in that topic and keep it in mind when you're looking at research. The reason why is because everything ultimately boils down to what is material reality. And you can ask questions like, well, is using the method that they are using actually a way to uncover the material reality of the circumstance? So that's just a basic question to keep in mind. But I know that that's pretty broad and general, so it's helpful to go deeper than that. So beyond that very fundamental principle of materialism, I recommend to generally become acquainted with logical fallacies and cognitive biases so that when you're studying some particular health issue and you're looking at papers, you can see if people are employing correct logic or not. And if they are not, then it may be not quite reliable. And sometimes the research may be good, but the conclusions drawn from the research are just not conclusions that you can logically draw from the research. So being aware of logical fallacies and cognitive biases can help with that. The next thing that I would say is to become familiar with the basics of science, that being what the scientific method is really like. And then you can see, when you're looking at different studies, whether they are actually following the scientific method as best as can be followed. Now, it's not like the scientific method is just one strict method that applies in every circumstance. It doesn't quite work like that. It's actually a set of methods, really, but those sets of methods have commonalities between them. So you have to become acquainted with those commonalities. Beyond that, I would say that it's of science. And seeing what science has found so far can help you to be able to see whether research is taking those finds of science into account. And that's, this is kind of long-term advice, because it takes time to become acquainted with all of these things, but this is really the best way to do it. And there are some really good resources for becoming acquainted with this, and I'll mention ones that we have mentioned before. There's a YouTube channel called SciShow. That's SCI show, sci like science. SciShow. It's just a simple YouTube channel. They make new videos all the time on science topics. And on YouTube, you may notice that on the side, if you go to a YouTube channel, on the right side, it will often say related channels. Or on the menu within the channel, it'll say channels. And you can follow those channels to find other YouTube channels that are generally interested in promoting science. There's a channel called Minute Physics, and it's just short little videos explaining physics as has been discovered and developed by actual physicists in the modern world. So it's helpful. Like, those types of YouTube channels are meant to put science into easily understandable terms for the average person, and they will help you to understand the finds of science as well as the methods of science. And if you look on YouTube, I'm sure you can find information on logical fallacies and cognitive biases as well. So if you like videos, if that's a good way for you to learn, those are some good recommendations for YouTube. And other than that, there's encyclopedia articles. If you like reading on these topics, that's a good way to go. So this is really the way to do it best. The best way to do it is to become acquainted with these principles. So again, materialism, logic, science. That's kind of to summarize it. Be familiar with materialism, get familiar with logic, and get familiar with science. The last thing that I'll say in answer to your question is just repeating something that Victor Hodis had to say. And this is something that he said in Entering Wedge Part 2. He said that the most important thing is not to find out what Ellen White had to say on the subject of health, but to find out who the true health authorities are and what they have to say. So ultimately, it is important to realize that none of us as individuals will ever have enough time to do the detailed research on every issue that we might want to or feel that we need to, even just for our own health. And the fact is that even if we were to do our own individual research, ultimately, we have to recognize and work with a body of knowledge that has accumulated from the work of individuals who are vastly more acquainted with these subjects than we are or can be. So we need to do our indirect experiment to find out who the true health authorities are. And again, it's those who are foremost in promoting science-based medicine, and religiously follow what they have to say on the subject. Now that is far more efficient than feeling like we have to do the detailed research on every individual topic. But this is why I'm saying it's more important to become acquainted with materialism, with logic, and with science in general, both in terms of method and scientific findings, actual conclusions. If you become generally acquainted with those things, these are principle-based things, it will become easy for you to recognize who the true health authorities are and whether what they're saying is actually valid, because you will understand the principles. So it's the combination of those things. It's not one or the other. I'm not saying to just, find out who the best health authorities are and just simply go with whatever they say, and that's it. Don't do any research. Don't actually learn more yourself. No, in fact, the true health authorities themselves actually say that you need to learn the basics of science and so on and so forth. That's essential for your own well-being. So it's a combination of learning materialism, logic, and science, and recognizing who the true health authorities are and doing your indirect experiment through learning materialism, logic, and science in order to recognize that these individuals do know what they're talking about as best as anyone can at the present time, and that their advice on health topics is the best to follow. So hopefully that answers your question with clarity.
I had a couple more questions too, but the first one also relates to the question about research. So certain websites like cdc.org and the Cochrane.org and the PubMed, they're like not high school level, college level. And by reading the article, it's not just based on the materialism principle or scientific principle. It requires more statistic level and nutrition background. So it's not really easy to read. It's like, 3, 5, 7, 8, 9 pages journal for a research paper like that. So how are you, are we supposed to be like that level to read that? And also, and what about the people, in our group or in general, some common, people only have third grade level or sixth grade level, and how are we supposed to teach them, or how are they supposed to read this and then try their ginger remedy? Yeah, so that was one of my questions. And
Sure. And do you mind if I answer that one first before you mention your next one?
Oh, sure, yeah.
Okay, excellent. So, yeah, that's an excellent question. And so, yes, as you are pointing out very well, that many of these articles are written in a very high context. In other words, they're written in a way that in order to really even understand all of what they're talking about, you have to know something about, statistics or nutrition or whatever it may be, depending on the issue. And this is why I'm saying that what's most important is for us to get a general understanding of materialism, logic, and science, and to understand who the best health authorities are and what they say. Because in reality, not everyone can or should become an expert in nutrition or an expert in cancer research or an expert in neurology or an expert in human anatomy or whatever. Not everyone can do that, and not everyone should do that. We simply don't have the time in this life to become an expert on everything. It is true that there needs to be people who are experts in all of those things, but no one can be an expert in all of it. And not everyone is even going to be an expert in anything. So, like you said, there are those who may only have a third grade reading level or sixth grade or whatever, who may just find it very difficult to digest academic literature. Not everyone has to become able to read academic literature. So this is why we just have to learn who the true health authorities are and what they say on the subject, and generally improve our understanding of materialism, logic, and science. That is what will lead us to the right conclusions. Because, as I've mentioned before, most of us are not actually able to even conduct right experiments on most things. I do not have enough understanding of physics, for example, to even be able to come up with a good experiment to do in order to test whether a certain particle exists or the nature of dark matter. These are subjects that physicists today are grappling with, and the best minds on these subjects who have the most knowledge don't yet know exactly how to figure out the nature of dark matter, for example. And I just have no clue where to even begin on something like that. And so how would I know whether what they have to say on it is legitimate or not? Well, I just need to understand who the true physicists are, and I need to understand the principles foundational to materialism, logic, and science. And in understanding those principles, when it comes to the issue of dark matter, for example, I look at the field of physics and I see some of the people who are recognized by other physicists at being at the forefront of their field, Nobel Prize winners and so on and so forth. And I can see that they don't know what dark matter really is. And so on that question, the field is in a state of uncertainty. They do not know. They're trying to figure it out. And so I have to recognize that I don't know, and right now I cannot know. But what I do know is that the field is rigorous and that there is a very high standard of experimental knowledge within physics, and there very well may be discoveries made potentially within the next few years that will uncover the nature of dark matter. And when that happens, I will be able to know what dark matter is, because I can verify that the physicists at the forefront of doing research on dark matter are legitimate scientists who have knowledge about this, that while I do not share that specific knowledge, I have knowledge concerning the legitimacy of their knowledge. And that's all I need to know. I don't need to become a physicist to learn that the conclusions of physicists are correct, just like I don't need to know how a radio works and how to build a radio in order to know that there are people who know how to make radios and that it actually works, that it's legit. I can verify that even without knowing how to do it myself. So it's the same thing with nutrition or with medicine or with the basic things like ginger and whether it's good for our stomach or whatever. I can verify those things without having to become an expert in the field, because I can verify who the experts are and find out what they have to say on the subject. Does that answer your question?
Oh, yeah, that helps. So now my question is, who is the true health?
Oh, hey, actually, Rachel, before that, Teresa had a comment.
Before you ask your question, I want to add something to what you've been asking. And that is just that one of the things that stands out to me is that, it'll be good for us to keep something in mind. And before I mention what that is, I want to just qualify what I'm about to say by saying that I'm not implying that anybody is doing this or anything like that. This is just kind of an awareness of what could happen and what we want to avoid or whatever, or just how to keep things in mind. The specifics of all of this are very important, but while they are important, I think it'll also be very important for us to not lose track of the fact that it is the principle of the action involved that we need to be most focused on. It is the way of thinking and the approach to all of these things that we take that is most important. So while it's very wonderful and important to know how do we research critically, how do we go about obtaining information, et cetera, that's all great. But we wouldn't want to lose sight of the fact that it's more important to understand why it's important to know how to do these things. Do you want to add anything to that?
No, I think that's very well put,
okay.
And I wholeheartedly agree.
Yeah, because our way of thinking, like just our approach to truth, that's what's most important. And it's in all subject matter. So if we are kind of adverse to digging down to the nitty-gritty as to what the truth is about, let's just say ginger for your example, if we don't really want to do that, if it's too much trouble and we think, what's the big deal, that's the approach that we will also take in other matters. And let's just say that that other matter has something to do with theology or, religion in general or how we treat others or our view of morality, Well, man, that's a lot of work to get down to the nitty-gritty of what the basis of morality really is and understanding materialism and all that sort of thing. It's just most important for us to have the approach to everything that it's not good enough to just go with what feels right. It's not good enough to guess at something just because, well, it seems like it's logical, you know. Is it logical? Have you dealt with that? Have you reasoned it through? You know.
It's the lazy approach.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I just really wanted to throw that out before we got into any more specifics, so that while it's important, you know, to go through these specifics, people can be keeping it in mind why it's important that we even care about the specifics in the first place.
Excellent. Great. Yeah, thank you for mentioning that.
So anytime you want to ask your next question, Rachel, feel free. That's all I wanted to say.
Oh, I like it, Teresa. That was really nice. Yeah, so basically,
Right, cool.
The Heavenly Family is teaching us to follow the truth, including nutrition, and how does it apply to us, to our life. Is that right?
Sure.
Yeah, absolutely.
So now my question is the true health authorities, and I had a couple of people in my mind. Are you familiar with Dr. McDougall and Michael Brewer? Those vegan doctors. They don't sell their superfood, but they do have books and audio books to sell, and basically they are the lifestyle prevention doctor from heart disease and high blood pressure, diabetes, obesity, etc. And their approach is low fat and lots of fruit and vegetable. And they talk about articles, and they do have some review research paper to back up what they are saying. So, would it be easy to to show people about this type of doctor, so people learn from it, because they're the health authority. We've done all the research, and when we review those articles and read it, we can nail it down. So what do you think about it?
I want to clarify the specific names. So you said Mike something. Is he the writer for naturalnews.com?
No.
Could you say his name again then?
drmcdougall.com, drmcdougall.com.
Okay, I'm not familiar with him. So yeah, I can't comment on the specific person then, but just from what you're saying about the individual and what they promote, it does not sound like they are a health authority, because science-based medicine does not promote veganism, nor does it promote a low-fat diet. It promotes eating healthy fats and generally eating low carbs. That's generally what science-based medicine advocates. But again, it's flexible. Different people need different amounts of different nutrients and so on. But
and low carb may mean one thing to one person, one thing to another person.
Yeah, exactly.
Someone
not excessively low.
Extreme,
yeah. But yeah. So it just I can't comment on the specific person, so that's difficult to say. But what I think is important to keep in mind is it's not just whether someone has studies to show so-called evidence for what they have to say, because that's just the standard of evidence-based medicine. Science-based medicine goes beyond that to find the principles involved and take into account all of the body of scientific literature that is in any way relevant to the topic. Yeah, so really, again, those who are at the forefront of promoting science-based medicine are really those who we should look to as being health authorities. And, the resources that we have listed on bdsda.com are the best resources that we are presently familiar with. Not to say that there are not others that are just as good and maybe some better, but definitely I have no hesitation in recommending sciencebasedmedicine.org for people to check out and to consider that website as being a good resource for getting information from true health authorities.
And one thing I'll just add, just again to emphasize the principle, is that while science-based medicine may not promote veganism, it's not to say that veganism is never appropriate for an individual. So, it's the principle involved, and each person is different, and each person metabolizes things in a different way. Some people are lactose intolerant. Veganism might be better for them, or at least no dairy. It might, eggs might be okay, but, a person's metabolism is specific to them, and we just can't say that veganism is right for everyone. Neither can we say that it's never right for anyone.
Right. There may be people who that's just their healthiest option, but for most people, that isn't the healthiest option.
Yeah, it's very difficult to get some essential nutrients on a vegan diet. Not
What is
impossible.
a vegan diet?
A vegan diet means no milk, dairy of any kind, no eggs, no animal products. Some people even go so far as to say no honey, because that's produced by bees.
Thank you.
But that's debated.
Yeah. But basically no dairy and no eggs.
So we're lacto-ovo vegetarian.
Right. We eat dairy and eggs, at least Trent and I do. So that would be a correct term for that form of vegetarianism.
For sure.
Okay, thank you. So basically, so far, you guys recommend science-based medicine, and you find the true authorities at that website as well. That's my understanding.
Yes, I would agree with that. And you may find them elsewhere too. And like I said, on the sciencebasedmedicine.org website, there are links from that website to other websites which they recommend. And I think that that's a good way to go, because sciencebasedmedicine.org is generally promoting science-based medicine, but there are other websites that they link to that are on more specific topics, like heart health or some other thing. And you can really probably find a lot more specific information on some of the other websites. And they even have a website for science-based veterinary health, because there's just as much pseudoscience in veterinary health as there is in medicine for humans. So if you're interested in the well-being of pets, then going with science-based medicine for your pets is really the only responsible thing to do as well. So you can find links to science-based veterinary websites from sciencebasedmedicine.org, just as an example.
So we need to determine if the doctor is evidence-based or science-based.
Well, that would be a good thing to do. However, I will say that science-based medicine never comes down to just one individual or anything like that. So even if your doctor is, generally inclines him or herself towards science-based medicine, you have to understand that that does not mean that all of their conclusions will be correct, but definitely they will be able to help you a lot more than if they were not science-based in their approach. And yeah, most doctors, to my knowledge, are more so evidence-based than science-based, and that may simply be due to a lack of awareness. So as I mentioned last night, it's good to promote science-based medicine to our doctors, and of course to do it in a way that does not come across as though we think that we know more about health or the body than they do, because chances are we don't. But we can make them aware of the fact that science-based medicine is very important to us, and that we really care that there are not any sort of pseudoscientific elements brought into our treatments or our health upkeep or whatever. And we can tell them that, we aren't into alternative health, and that we believe that mainstream medicine is generally a good thing, but that it needs to be held to high standards, and that we recognize that mainstream medicine is being polluted with complementary and alternative medicine and pseudoscientific ideas, at least to some degree, and that we really care about science. And we could even say, like, hey, this is a website that I use and go to, and I want to know what you think about this. Have a real conversation with your doctor about it and find out what they really think, and if they think that science-based medicine is really important or not. And if they don't think it's important, you can encourage them to think that it's important. And if they resist that, then maybe you just need to find a different doctor. We can't pressure someone. We can promote it, express how important it is to us. But if they are just not willing to kind of make that move to really be science-based, then try and find someone who is. So that's the recommendation.
What about the 8 natural laws of health? What's that based on?
The 8 natural laws of health, what is that based on? I don't know the origins of it, to be honest. I don't know what that is based on. And it's, I hear it with Adventists and all of that. I don't know if that's something that you would hear from science-based medicine advocates, although probably a lot of that, like, hey, getting enough sunshine and exercise and eating, food with enough nutrition and so on. Like, generally speaking, that is good advice, and science-based medicine is on board with that. But I don't know if the packaging of that and the way it's presented, and if all of the specifics are really the best thing to go by. In other words, I wouldn't say that it's gospel truth or anything, the 8 principles or whatever. But Anyway, I just wanted to mention we're about an hour into the study, and I think it's generally good to keep our meetings an hour or maybe up to an hour and a half, and hopefully not much more than that. But when we're having discussions like this, and it's not like a lecture, it's okay to have it a little bit longer from time to time. But I know that it gets late for people. So I just wanted to ask if there are any final comments or questions before we bring the meeting to a close.
Wanted to ask one quick one, and I'm going to use Rachel's example of the ginger. Let's assume that we look into ginger, and the only evidence that we can find is alternative medicine kind of evidence and anecdotal evidence, people just making claims and that kind of thing. We can't find any scientific studies that were done on it. And I think there's a lot of things that may fall into this category where there's not been a scientific study done on, I don't know, cumin or garlic or ginger or whatever, but we'll just stick to ginger. Let's just assume there never has been a scientific study, at least that we can find. Would we just throw that out as a possible remedy for a stomach ache at 2 o'clock in the morning or whatever? Or would we say, there's two ways of looking at that. One is it must not be a big problem because there hasn't been a study on it, which is kind of a logical fallacy. But I mean, obviously nobody's died from it or anything like that, or there would be a study, I would assume. So anyway, just some quick comment on that. The kind of, the things that we're researching, trying to find out, and we can't find any scientific evidence on, is it just something we walk away from, or, can we just go on using it, or what do you think of that?
Okay, so this really depends on what it is and what it's for. I'll go with the example that we're using, ginger for a stomach ache. Okay, so if we cannot find backing for it as actually helping a stomach ache or whatever, then we shouldn't use it for a stomach ache. Now, it doesn't mean that we don't drink ginger tea or whatever. I like ginger tea, and so when Teresa and I were in Missouri, coming to the end of it, I got really sick. So I'm kind of changing the example a little bit. So I had, I was a bit feverish and congested really bad, and a bit of a sore throat, and, not too bad for the sore throat, but like definitely congested. And so I was like, oh, I should look up science-based medicine in regard to this sort of thing to see what I should do. And it turned out that it's like, hey, basically there's nothing that's really shown to work for, just the common cold or for, basically the symptoms that I was having. And here's the other thing, is that there could be many different causes for those symptoms. And for some things, there are effective treatments, but then I'd have to go and have it diagnosed and all of that, and it just simply wasn't serious enough to actually do that. So I drank ginger tea during that, not as a cure or a treatment for my sickness. I was thinking possibly it was a virus that I caught somewhere. That's possible. The symptoms match that, but it's not certain. Like, it may not have been a virus. If it was a virus, drinking ginger tea would have done nothing to help it. And so I wasn't taking it to actually treat the disease or anything. But I'll tell you, when my throat was feeling a little sore like that, having some strong ginger tea and having that slight burny sensation just feels good. And it's good to have lots of fluids and whatever anyway, and I enjoy the taste of it. So it's like, yeah, I'm going to drink ginger tea during this. And I honestly, it would be wrong if I was to do it thinking like, oh, this is my way to really treat myself and convince myself that I'm not using it as a treatment. No, I honestly did not think it was going to help me get better any faster or get better at all, but it was at least pleasant and soothing, and more than likely just having that moist, warm, whatever, loosened up some mucus in my sinuses or whatever.
Yeah, just like hot water would have.
Exactly. And actually, I had just hot water too, without the ginger in it. And so, that was fine. So, ginger tea, just having it as a tea is okay. And so if someone has found it to be soothing to their stomach to drink ginger tea, I don't see a problem with them drinking it to soothe their stomach, just so long as they're not thinking that it's actually curing their problem. You'd have to recognize it may be soothing, but that might not be fixing anything. And so don't take it to fix something that you don't know it's going to fix. If you're going to drink it to possibly soothe your stomach because you've had that experience, even if it's not a genuine experience, but you've had the sensation of soothing from it before, and you're going to take it out of the chance that maybe it'll soothe it, but recognizing that it might not, and if you have no evidence that it's going to fix any problems, then don't take it to fix any problems. But, ginger tea is, so far as we know, it's not injurious or anything. It's okay. It's fine. It's good. So unless we have evidence that it's not good, it's okay to drink it just as a tea. And again, hopefully this has some qualification and nuance to it, and I hope that you guys are getting the nuance of this, because I do not want to give the impression that, you should use it for your achy stomach even if it's not science-based. Because even that statement is a little bit too ambiguous. When we talk about an achy stomach, what are we talking about? Are we talking about some serious thing, or what's the cause of it? So it may be different things for different people and at different times, and maybe for someone it wouldn't be good to take it to soothe it or whatever at a given time. So it really does depend on the specifics of the circumstance, which is why I brought in my specific circumstance, because in that circumstance, I know the specifics of it and I can comment on it as it applies to my own specific circumstance in that instance. And I can say that it would have been wrong for me to drink ginger tea thinking that it was actually going to help anything or better my condition or whatever. But it was an enjoyable drink for me to have, and I needed to be drinking fluids anyway, and it just felt good to drink. So under that premise and within that thought process, it's totally fine to do. And the same may apply in some instances of someone with a stomach ache. But again, it really does depend. Does that answer your question, Ed?
Yeah, I think so, mostly. I mean, it's like you said, we can't look at everything, and, there's certain things, and I can't really think of one. That's why I used her example. But, obviously, if you have a stomach ulcer, don't try to cure your stomach ulcer by drinking ginger tea or eating ginger or something like that. But, if you know from past experience that sometimes you have an upset stomach and you drink some kind of tea, whether it's ginger or whatever, and it relieves it a little bit, that's probably fine, especially if you know the cause of your upset stomach is you ate some pizza or something, or whatever, that kind of a thing. So anyway, but yeah, that's helpful. Thank you.
Okay, cool. All right. If there's any more comments or questions at this point, we'll just take one more comment or question. So does anyone have any last comments or questions? And if not, someone can thank our Heavenly Family.
Dear Heavenly Family, thank you so much for the information and the principle and teach us how to apply in our life. So we will learn how to follow the truth and do what we're supposed to do. In the name of Brian, he and she, amen.
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 All right. Love you all. Have a good night.
Good night, everyone. Lila Tov.